Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you are doing well. So today we are going to start with a new lesson, how, when and where. So throughout your history lessons, I am sure you must have started with the chapter 1 with how, when and where. Now, what does it signify in this session? Let's have a look. So in this chapter we are going to learn about what are the important dates. As we spoke about how, when and where, we have to keep in mind that we'll be talking about dates, places and the procedures of whatever happened in our history. So, how important are the dates and what dates are important? Not every date is important, isn't it? For example, in your life, certain birth dates are important. Your birthday, your parents' birthday, your friend's birthday, right? Then we are going to learn about how do we periodize. Now, we will see what is periodization. For example, starting from 1 year to a long period of time, how do we periodize things and events that took place in the history? What is colonial? The term colonial, I'm sure that you must have heard colonization, colonial, etc. Now, what is colonial? We'll see that. Administration produces records. Now, who was responsible for all these records that were maintained, these dates, places, things, books, etc. So, the administration which produces records. Surveys become important. What role the surveys play in the history and preserving history and culture? We'll see that. What official records do not tell. So, when we talk about history, it is not just 1 year, 2 year or a specific period of time. It was long time back. So, there must be few things which are not recorded or which remain unrecorded. So, what was the things, what were the events that were not found in the records? We'll have a look at that. So, let's begin. So, to begin with the lesson, let's have a look at a story. So, what do history tells us? Can you tell me? Can you think about it? I am sure you all must be wondering, what does history tells us? Why are we studying history? It's all in the past. How is it significant today for us? So, history tells us about the people of the past and their ways of living. So, that we can compare between the ancient era, the early times and how life is today. What were the developments that took place, so that we can compare, establish a comparison and where we were and where we are from now, so that we can even plan for the future. Where the people used to live, what did they used to do, what was the work that they used to do, what they ate, what they wore, what festivals they celebrated, so that we can preserve our cultures, our rituals and pass on it to newer generations. So, there is a conversation between two people here. One student, just like you, says, I do not like history, there are so many dates, so many facts, I just cannot remember it, it's boring. Then, the other girl, the girl says, no, history is not boring subject, it is interesting because it gives us an outline of where we come from, about our ancestors, about the society that has developed and we are living in now. So, how important dates are? I am sure you face a very difficult time in studying dates, remembering 1798, remembering 1805, etc. So, how important dates are? What is the significance of the date? For example, just think, if you were born on 23rd of July and you failed to remember that date of birth of yours, or if your parents do not remember, they did not have the record of your birth date, will you ever be able to celebrate your birthday? No, you wouldn't have been. So, that is why dates are important. So, a time when history was synonymous to dates. History is all about comparison, as we discussed, so that we can compare old and new ways. Everything has a history, like tea. When was tea discovered? Newspapers, when did the printing press started? How was the rail, and when did the railways were started? Then everything must have a time, like when they were discovered, when it started, isn't it? But it is actually incorrect to fix a precise date for these processes, because railways were not built in one day. It was not like that we laid all the tracks and railway lines in one day and the other day we started with the railway journeys. It took a lot of period, a long period of time to develop these things. So, it is not just about one date, one particular date. It is about a period that happened in the past. For example, people in India did not begin drinking tea in one day, did they? No. So it was a period, it was over a period of time, it was a process of development where they found tea, people adapted to the taste of tea, and that is how it became important in our culture. So, the reasons for associating dates with history. Why do we have that association, that link between dates and history, historical events, past events? Earlier, there was a time when history was an account. It was not something that we used to teach. It was just an account. We had the records, we used to study it. There were historians and archaeologists who could link it. Now, this is one style for recording history of battles and big events, accounting. So, accounting is nothing but maintaining a record of dates and places where an event took place. For instance, historians wrote about the year a king was crowned, the year he got married, the year he had a child, the year he ruled, he fought a battle, and the year he died. So, this system was known as accounting of records and history. Now, another style of recording the history is also there, which is not date centering. So, there is not just one method to talk about history or keeping the records of history. Another style of recording history is also there, but it is not date centering. It is not only centered or related to numerals like dates, years, places, etc. The reason behind these questions and certain events is very subjective. There are detailed theories why that happened, how it happened over a period of time. For example, how people earn their livelihood. So, can you comprise it just in one date or one numeral? No, you can't, because here we are talking about reasons, like how something happened. So, you will have to explain the process, that first this happened, then that happened. For example, what they produced and ate. Can you give it a date? No, because here we are talking about a descriptive question. We are talking about the reasons and subjective questions. They look at how people earned their livelihood, what they produced and ate, what they wore, how things developed, how cities developed, what were the markets like, what was trade like, etc. So, which dates? Now, as we talked about that dates have accounts, we accounted and maintained the records of date and place where things and events were taking place. But which dates? Now, how do you know which date is important and which date is not important? For example, if today is 15th of January and tomorrow is 26th of January, how do you differ between the two, that which date is important? Of course, 26th of Jan, because it is a Republic Day. But what about history? So, history is not all about dates, but dates do play a very important role. Now, how to choose which date? Dates depend on event. As we discussed the example of 15th and 26th of Jan, why is 26th Jan important? Because that was the day when our constitution came into force. So, it has a historical significance important for our country, for the people of India, right? So, that becomes an important date in our culture and society and for our nation. So, dates, important dates and significant dates which were recorded or which were held into account were recorded on the basis that what events took place on those dates. If our focus of study, if we begin to look at new issues, a new set of dates, they will start to appear significant. So, for example, they have given us few examples here so that we can understand it better. So, the histories written by British historians in India, the rule of each governor general was important for them. So, they recorded the dates from which the governor general started to govern a particular city or a state. Apart from that, their classification will revolve around British governor generals. So, the Indian events were not important for Britishers, so they only recorded the events and the tasks on the date they happened, which was significant for them. So, it is also important to note that it is about the significance, and that significance may differ for everyone. But when we will write the history from Indian perspective, we will have different dates, new set of dates, new set of events which are important and significant for us and our culture and history. So, how do we periodize? Now, what is periodization? I am sure you must have heard or read in your previous books and your previous classes that from 1785 to 1795, so in the period of these 10 years, now what is this periodization? What is a period? We will see that. We can show significant changes between different periods. So, periods, what we talk about period in terms of history, that begins from one year or one specific date to a specific date in the past. Period consists of one or more than 1 year of years. In 1817, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, he came and he published a book, A History of British India. He divided that book in Indian history into 3 periods. So, it was not just one document, one book. He divided that book in 3 volumes or 3 periods. What were those periods? The Hindus, the Muslims and the British. Why? Because when we talk about Indian history, it is not just 1 year or a span of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's a very, very long period in the history from one specific date to the ending of British era. So, first there were Hindus who dominated the Indian subcontinent. Then the Muslim rulers came in, the Mughal Empire. After that, India was ruled by the Britishers. So, these volumes, these books, the history of British India is divided into 3 periods. At that time, this periodization was widely accepted. So, when this method started, it was widely accepted and cherished by people. James Mill's idea of history was that British rule as the forces to progress and civilization. So, his idea of history about Indian subcontinent is, and the British led India was, that British rule, they forced us, they took us in the direction of progress and civilization. Do you agree on that? But there was a problem with this periodization process that James Mill offered. What were the problems that were offered by James Mill periodization method? Now, James Mill divided history of religious grounds under Hindu, Muslim and British. Is it right to characterize as age only through religion of the rulers at that time? For example, he divided into Hindu, Muslim and Britishers, which is based on more or less the religion of the rulers who dictated and who dominated India at that time. Earlier, there were rulers who were Hindu, so Hindu period. Then there were Mughals, that period is known as a Muslim period. Then after that the Britishers came in, that period is known as a British period. So, is it right? Because there are other factors also to consider in that part. Does the life, religions and practices of others do not matter? There were a lot of other rulers, other kingdoms in India, since India was a very big subcontinent even then, who did not belong to any of these 3 categories. What about them? Of course, they have left a mark on history, such as the Marathas, the Peshwas, etc. This periodization is not true and justified, and later on people tried to relate to it, but they just couldn't. Because variety of faith existed simultaneously in India. Apart from Britishers, there were also Portuguese, French, Dutch who ruled India at that time. What about their culture and their religion practices? When Delhi was ruled by Muslim ruler, in south there were rulers of other faith as well. Due to limitation of periodization offered by James Mill, moving away from British classifications, history have divided Indian ancient history into ancient history, primitive and old society, medieval history, transitioning phase, the transitioning period from the ancient towards the modern. Then we have the modern period associated with growth of modern forces, for example, science, technology, infrastructure development, agriculture, etc. Many historians refer this modern period as the colonial period. So, what is colonial? Now that we have spoken about colonization and the modern period was known as the colonial period, what is that? So, when the British came to India, they conquered the local Nawabs and Rajas in different kingdoms and parts of the Indian subcontinent. They started to establish their own rules and policies regarding trade, what kind of life would be lived by the people in that kingdom or city, what kind of things will be traded, etc. They started subjugating local Nawabs and Rajas. So what does it mean? They started to dominate those Raja and Nawabs, and their rule had to be followed everywhere. They established control over the economy and society. How did they do that? They captured the ports and modes of transportation through which people used to go and trade, and they ruled over them so that nobody else could practice those trades. They brought about in values and taste, custom and practices of their own land, their own culture, so that the Indian culture and the local and native culture would be subdued or overshadowed by it. We can say that they colonized India. They made small colonies of their rule. So wherever the Britishers ruled, those places came to known as the colonies under the British rule. So as this process started and developed with a high speed, this process was started to know as the colonization of India. So what is the colonization? The subjugation of one country by another leads to these kind of political conflicts, economic, social and cultural changes. This process is known as colonization. So what is administration and how it produces records of the colonial period? Now, how do we talk about the last 250 years of Indian history? What are the official records of the British administration? Let's have a look. So, every instruction, plan, policy decision, agreement, investigation under the British rule between kings and the British East India Company was recorded and clearly written up in their accounts. All important documents, letters, they needed to be carefully preserved. Record rooms attached to all administrative institutions. For example, there were a lot of administrative institutions for the welfare of the people, for managing their offices, etc. These record rooms were made. Specialized institutions like archives and museums were also established to preserve important records and books. So, letters and memos of various branches were also preserved. So it was not just important dates and events in the history, it was the day-to-day activities that were taking place, everything related to their trade in India, to their trade outside of world, etc. was recorded and preserved in a well systematized matter. So these documents were carefully copied out and beautifully written by calligraphs. So have you heard of calligraphy? Calligraphy is an art of writing in a very beautiful way. There are letters and alphabets written by an ink pen in a very beautiful way. That is known as calligraphy. And calligraphists were the people who were trained and specialized to do that. So all these documents were carefully copied out. We did not have printers at that time. You could not just scan or take a photocopy. So every document, if it needed to be reproduced, it was written by hand. And these calligraphists came into force at that time. That is by those who specialize in the art of calligraphy. With the spread of printing, later on when the printing press and printers were developed, each document and copy, they were multiplied and all these records are printed as proceedings of each government department, so that each government department and branch of administration could have a bulk load of backlog and records could be maintained. So survey becomes important. Now we have discussed about different kinds of records, how were they maintained, printing press, calligraphists, etc. Now what is survey and how did it become important in the ancient Indian history? Repeat. And what is survey and how did it become important in the colonial period? Another important source of writing history was through surveys. I am sure you must have heard that there are people coming for survey. As people were going under the COVID vaccination, there were medical students and interns who used to come for a survey that how many people have gotten the COVID shot. So what is survey? Survey is about recording and examining of a data in a particular or given area on a particular subject. Now what does it mean? You need to understand. So surveys are based on a particular population. So there are people who go, who ask questions, they record the data in their books and it is specifically based on a specific age group and a particular area. So for example, if I have to conduct a survey for my firm, I would go to few houses in my locality and ask them questions. I will record each of their responses and then examine them as to how it could benefit me. British believed that a country had to be properly known before it could be effectively administered or ruled. Therefore, they started doing their survey, as in what the people wanted, what were their lives like. So, they recorded each and everything through surveys and they started to examine the data that they recorded. That helped them to give a clear perspective on what the people want and what the British administration needs to do for them. So, revenue surveys, surveys for topography, soil, quality of soil, flora, fauna, local history, cropping patterns was also recorded and carried out. So, what official records do not tell us? So, at the time of colonial period, during the process of colonization, we need to understand that there are official records which are only maintained by the British people and British governors. So, whatever data was recorded at that time, it was from the perspective of the British government, what they wanted, how they could benefit from it, what they were interested in, what they wished to preserve at that time that would benefit them. So, history must not be looked from just one perspective, there are other perspectives as well. So, diaries of people, accounts of pilgrims, travelers, autobiographers, etc. important people, they used to write their biography which had data about their lives, general people, ordinary people, popular booklets. They were sold in local bazaars which tell us more about life and that period than just the records maintained by the Britishers. Yet the history lacks the perspective of peasants, workers, farmer, tribal people, and it is difficult to get to know their lives and what were the difficulties that they faced at that time. What did we learn in this chapter? We learned about what are dates and how are they important. We learned what are surveys and what role do they play in our society. How were the administration and offices used to preserve their records and books. So, I hope you understood everything in this chapter. Thank you.